The Gotti case, Mafia experts John Miller, James LaRosa, Ed McDonald, and Jerry Capisi on the new political paradigm, Joe Klein, Elaine Comrick, and James Pinkerton, and as I said, Elvis Mitchell later to talk about movies and what's going on in Hollywood. But first, reputed mobster John Gotti has been acquitted 3 times in New York City, but this time around he may not be so lucky. Earlier this week, Gotti's right-hand man, Sammy the Bull Gravano, has turned state's evidence, and he plans to testify against Gotti. Here to talk about this stunning development of Mafia experts, John Miller of WNBC News, defense attorney James LaRosa, former federal prosecutor Ed McDonald, and Daily News columnist Jerry Capisi. Welcome. Any of that introduction served well?
I think it's served accurately right around them.
What's interesting is you all know each other. This is a constant conversation. You reporting, you're constantly being called on to talk about it. Jerry writes a column, and you as an attorney who...
I think we all know each other very well.
We've crossed a few times.
Here is my first question, really, and I'll turn to John. Why did he do this? I mean, tell me who Sammy the Bull Gravano is, and why did he do what he's done?
Sammy the Bull Gravano is really the day-to-day manager of the Gambino crime family. When you're talking about the position of underboss, the boss's entire agenda is for insulation. He doesn't want to be meeting with people one-on-one. He doesn't want people being able to testify against him. So his marching orders are really carried out day-to-day by the underboss, who knows what everybody's doing, what operations are going on, who has a hand in what. He is probably, of anyone you could make a deal with, the guy who could do the most damage to a crime family.
Especially in this case, because in the Gambino crime family, John Gotti took over in 1986, right after the killing of Paul Castellano, and Sammy the Bull basically came from the Castellano wing, or that faction of the crime family,
enabling Gotti to consolidate his power.
To consolidate, right, and to find out. In other words, Gotti had to find out, who do I own? What companies do I have? And what have I got? And Sammy the Bull helped John Gotti find that out.
So wise a guy. What kind of pressure would the feds have used?
I don't know whether they had to use very much at all. In fact, under the law, once he had counsel, and of course he had counsel a moment once he was indicted, the feds were not permitted to speak to him. I think that, and I don't know what happened, I would imagine this is something that he did on his own, maybe through family
Why
members.
would he do it?
Because he was afraid he was going to die in prison. He's sitting there looking at 50 years, 60 years in prison. He knows that many of the mobsters in the last 5 or 6 years have gotten substantial prison terms, and he's looked at people like Philly Rastelli, who was the boss of the Bonanno crime family, who recently died in prison. Looked at Paul Castellano, Paul Vario, who died in prison.
Paul Castellano died on the streets.
Yeah. And he sees that these people have actually died in prison. He's in his mid-40s. He's looking at 40 or 30 or 40 years in prison, and he says, what's going to happen to me at the end? I'm going to die. I'm going to die in jail. And I think it's just something he didn't want. I think he probably was living in luxury for the last few years and was comfortable, and he just wasn't as tough as the old-timers.
And what happens to the so-called omerta code of silence here?
Obviously, it doesn't exist very well. I think he might have done John Gotti a favor, though.
Why?
Long range. I think that they now have a witness that Al Krieger, who's John Gotti's lawyer, can cross-examine effectively. I think that they have another presentation to make to this jury, not just the tapes that they were trying to defend against. I don't think the ball game's over yet.
John, do you agree with that?
I think that the prosecution has a real balancing act, because, as Ed McDonald will tell you, they have their own baggage. The question is, how heavy is this bag?
And the baggage is the criminal record of Gravano, and how he might be, his testimony might not be credible.
It's not that it wouldn't be credible. They are likely to believe everything he says, but they may be just so repulsed by the idea that he's getting the deal after all he admits to on that witness stand, that they reject the entire case. It's a theory that actually Ed calls jury nullification.
Yeah. But it depends on how good a deal Sammy the Bull got. And I'll tell you, Ed McDonald is only 2 years out of the business, and I'll bet you that he'd like to go into court with Sammy the Bull Gravano testifying against John Gotti, especially with what's on those tapes.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, he can
tell me about the tapes.
Well, on the tapes, they talk about murder after murder after murder that they get involved in together. Granted that most of the murders on the tapes, as far as I've been able to hear, pertain to murders that John Gotti authorizes after Sammy Bull comes to John and says, hey, John, I want to whack this guy, I want to whack this guy. In fact, there's one conversation where John says, hey, what is it with you? You want to whack everybody you're in business with. But I think that
Is
Sammy
that the term
Bull,
he uses, whack?
that's I think one of the key terms that they use when they're referring to killing people. But I think any prosecutor would love to have one of the guys who's on tape explaining to the jury exactly what it was they were talking about when they talked about whacking, DiBernardo or Louis DeBono or
Well, Jerry,
whatever.
I think if the tapes are clear, then I think Jimmy is right that the government is really creating problems for itself. I mean, if you don't have any sort of confusion or ambiguity on the tapes, and the tapes speak for themselves, then you're not going to need somebody like Gravano, and you hurt your case by calling Gravano. But if they're talking about Joey, and it could be any number of 10 Joeys, and if they're talking in terms of maybe they use some other expressions other than whack and some other sort of slang, and a clever defense lawyer can suggest, well, they really weren't talking about that. I mean, people all the time are saying, oh, I'm going to kill my kid. My kid's driving me crazy. You don't really mean to kill your kid. And clever lawyers can come up with arguments and can create confusion and ambiguity. And if that's what the tapes are like, then they might need a Gravano to say who they were talking about and what they were talking about and when. But if the tapes are crystal clear and you know who they're talking about, and the government can convince the jury who they were talking about and what they were talking about, then they're harmed by calling somebody like Gravano.
So, answer Jim's case. Would you, in fact, like to have him, or I guess it was Jerry that made the point, if you were prosecuting this case, would you want to have Sammy the Bull as a witness?
Well, I hate to beg off. I mean, I'd like to know. I don't know the details of the case. I don't know the details of the tapes, and I haven't spoken to Gravano. I mean, Gravano could prove to be a terrible witness. I mean, he could know everything. We had people, informants come in and turn and cooperate who we didn't call as witnesses. We had other witnesses who were absolutely, you would look at them and you would think they were reprehensible. You would think that they were, dumb as stones. I mean, Henry Hill was a guy who was a perfect example.
Explain who Henry Hill is.
Henry Hill was the
Goodfellas and the guy from Wise Guys.
Yeah, the story was based on. It was a true story. And Henry was, barely articulate. I mean, you would think that he would be a terrible witness. And he was. On the witness stand, he was a terrible witness. But he had some quality about himself that he was able to just, produce conviction after conviction after conviction. And you never know. I mean, it's a crapshoot sometimes. You just don't know how a jury is going to react to a witness.
Sam Gravano is going to bring a lot of luggage into this courtroom.
What's the luggage?
A lot of vicious crimes that he's committed by himself. And the jury's going to hear this. And clever defense lawyers like Al Krieger are going to bring it out. They're going to bring out every piece of the detail. And they call Gravano the Bull for a reason, because he's got a thick neck, he allegedly takes steroids, he looks like a bull, and Gotti's going to come into that courtroom looking like a sleek greyhound. And
people are going to say what, you think?
Well, they never root for the bull. They never root for the bull.
Yeah, another problem he has, though, is that and mostly from John's shows, they're going to have, the government will be able to have tape after tape after tape of John Gotti walking down the street with the bull. And the jury is going to sit there and they're going to say, if he is so bad, what was John Gotti doing with him day in and day out? And the government has surveillance tapes and they're on tape talking together.
What's Gotti's reaction? I mean, do we know what he said about this?
No, but I think everybody's reaction about Gotti's reaction is the same, which is, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when somebody told him. I think the extension of Gotti's reaction, which always flows from the lawyers, is interesting because if you listen to the lawyers' rhetoric building up to this, they were always saying, but, these are men, these are good men. John Gotti, Sam Gravano, Frank Licasio, these are, solid guys. Well, I mean, they've been building up Sam Gravano as quite a character, and they're going to be backpedaling on that for a long time and very quickly.
If Gotti is there, how serious, how significant, how would you characterize the effort to convict John Gotti?
Oh, it's been monumental.
I know.
He's been target number one, public enemy number one, ever since he was acquitted of racketeering charges in 1987.
This very move is so demonstrative of that, because you have to say, well, we always use the little fish to catch the bigger fish. Yeah. But when you start cutting deals on the level of underboss, I mean, that's the second biggest fish in the sea. You're using some very big fish to catch other big fish.
Well,
they've used underbosses before, and 5 or 6 weeks ago we had a boss.
Yeah, they're not looking
come
to
into
him.
come into the cross the line and go on the other side.
Yeah, well, he's important. He's probably even more important in the long run. about other things he can tell them. I mean, if it turns out that
he's a worse guy in this case than Gotti is.
Yeah, but what's he going to do about the future? What can he tell them about? I mean, he can take down, if he's an articulate and a bright witness, and he has a good memory, and he can lead them to all the unions and all the businesses that they've controlled, and he can get up there and he can lead them to corroboration and then testify about it, and about the operations of other families, and about the operations of all of the associated people, the businessmen, if there are politicians who are associated with them, labor union officials, it goes on and on and on. He was in a position to know. He is in a position to know. So he could be far more important in the war against organized crime as a person to provide information, background information, and testimony in other cases than merely a witness against John Gotti.
If Gravano testifies, as I assume he will, and if in fact there's a conviction, what will it do to the family?
I don't know, but can I go back to that last question?
Yeah, you can.
They want John Gotti almost as bad as they wanted to win the Persian Gulf. I don't think anybody answered your question. Yeah. I think they want him very badly. He's thumbed his nose at the government. He's beaten them 3 times. He's become a bit of a folk hero. People talk about him in the street.
As a folk hero?
Yes. They write letters to him. He wins polls on television programs and on and on.
They write letters to newspaper reporters saying how good a guy he is.
You get those kinds of letters?
Oh, constantly. I mean, every week.
From the neighborhood? Or
from people in the neighborhood. I mean, a lot, look, to be honest.
But that's always been true, has it not?
No. It hasn't quite always been that true. No, I get letters every week from people telling me that the government is persecuting John Gotti. I get letters from people, telling me that, why don't you write about how come they're keeping John Gotti in jail without bail for 11 months.
Of course they want him. They want him badly. He's beaten them badly 3 times in a row.
Many of the letters, though, are form letters, and they're the same letters I get, week after week, and they've been Xerox copies. So I don't know how many original people get original thoughts to write me letters.
Does it make a lot of difference that Bruce Cutler is not on this case?
Well, he's in a no-lose position right now. I mean, Bruce Cutler can't lose anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the architect of 3 successive victories, and no matter what happens now, Bruce Cutler is the biggest winner.
But what about Gotti? In other words, is Gotti in a more vulnerable position, regardless of who the new lawyer is, because of this thing he had with Cutler?
I think they had something unusual, the 2 of them. There's no question about it.
What was it?
I don't know, but they seemed to walk together. They seemed to know what each was going to do. I think Bruce fed off him, and he fed off Bruce.
Yeah, there's no question.
I've never seen a situation where a client and an attorney mesh the way the 2 of them did.
You have done as much as anybody, probably have reported more on this certainly in terms of television. Have you had any success in getting to Gotti at all?
I've had
I've seen you on the street where he sort of brushes you.
But I mean, if you sit and talk to John Gotti like this, it's fine. If you sit with a camera and try and talk to John Gotti, it's a very different thing. In that respect, he's a very private person. But when you sit and talk like this, you're talking about baseball, you're talking about whatever was in the papers. You're not talking about crime.
If you raise the question of crime, what happens?
Maybe he'll make a joke about it, but I mean, there's no earnest discussion about it. There's a company line there. I don't know what you're talking about, and that's the company line.
Let me go back to the question of what happens if Gotti is convicted because of Gravano's testimony. What does that do to this family and to the other organized crime families?
Well, I think
does it start unraveling?
I don't know whether I think it might be too soon to say that it's unraveling. I think that certainly the family, all 5 families in New York, have had their operations impeded by the convictions of the last few years, but it really hasn't affected life in the street and life in certain industries where organized crime has predominated, or at least organized crime has had some sort of effect and impact. And I think that you have to remember that in that family there are probably 300 or 400 members. Someone will replace Gotti, someone will replace Gravano. Maybe they won't be effective. Maybe there'll be some sort of disunity within the family, and there'll be maybe a war within the family. But if there's an organized crime element controlling a certain union or a certain industry and is run by that family, it's going to continue to be run that way. Because the capo on the street is going to go to work every day and run his industry or run his rackets. And until you go down to that level and you start taking out those people and you start rooting out the corruption in these industries and the corruption that has been there for decades now, you're not really going to have an impact. The government is not going to have a real impact.
Do you agree with the characterization of how strongly the government is trying to get Gotti? And
yeah, there's no question about that.
And does it bother you as a former prosecutor that Gotti has this reputation as a kind of folk hero, the way he dresses, the way he carries himself, and the fact that he's beaten the case against him 3 times?
Well, it doesn't bother me in the sense that he didn't beat me. My office never prosecuted him. I thought that at least two of the prosecutors.
But I know a lot of prosecutors would be offended by the notion of someone that they've tried so hard to get is being characterized as a folk hero.
Well, I don't know. Jerry and I have gone back and forth on this a number of times, and Jerry feels that he is a folk hero, and that large percentage of the people in Italian-American communities really sort of revere John Gotti. And I think that it's a much smaller segment of the communities. I think it's a very vocal and outspoken segment of the communities, but I think it's a very negligible percentage of
it's
the...
a lot bigger.
It's a lot bigger.
I think it's a lot
36
bigger.
jurors in a row. That's
Well, but that's...
That's quite a...
Oh, you said not guilty.
But
you're
that
right.
doesn't
Yeah.
say they
That's a little
revere
bit of
him. That just says
exaggeration.
that the government went to bat with really weak cases, really poor cases. In two instances, and in the case in New York County, I think there was good lawyering. Good lawyering got him off on a case that was really a close call. But I don't think that means that because 36 people said not guilty, that people in the Italian American communities in this city revere John Gotti.
No, I don't either. I don't think that the Italian American community reveres John Gotti. I think in some communities, like Ozone Park, he is a hero. I mean, in Howard Beach, perhaps he's a hero. I don't think the entire Italian American community loves and adores
How
John
did they
Gotti.
get these tapes?
Well, they put several bugs in and about the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street. What they did was, and it's interesting, is that they had a bug in the Ravenite Social Club proper, which really wasn't
Which is
working
Gotti's
so
Social
well.
Club.
Right, on Mulberry Street. That bug wasn't really working so well, but John Gotti didn't know that, and he went outside the Ravenite upstairs to an apartment and in a hallway where they had bugs that were working pretty well. And I'm told that the more damaging tapes conversations occur in those hallway conversations and in the conversations up in the apartment above the Ravenite. I don't know exactly how the FBI breaks into apartments, especially on Mulberry Street, which is a pretty closed community, to put the bugs in. But however they did it, had to be something, because they had to go in more
and
than
the
once.
tapes are every bit as important as Semi. The
far
Bowl
more
of Honor.
I think
Far
the
more
Bowl-
important.
They're nearly useless without each other.
Yeah.
Oh, I disagree, John. I think
But,
it,
well, if you're talking about decoding them and all that, I would say that the tapes are the killer tapes, and they should have stopped there, and making a deal was foolish. But remember, we're
Would you
dealing...
say that?
I would, but remember, in reality, we're dealing with the experience we've seen in the Gene Gotti case and in other cases, in the state Gotti case, where you say, well, tapes don't lie.
Yeah.
And then clever defense lawyers get up and they do their best, and by the time they're finished, you're sitting there in the same courtroom, having heard the same tapes with the transcript in front of you saying, yeah, but that tape doesn't really say this.
Yeah.
You know, the hand is quicker than the eye or something,
Yeah,
but it worked, and it worked
difference
2 or
is-
3 times.
And
The
even
difference is-
even in cases of videotape, not just audio tape.
no, but the difference is it's not so much video. If you have somebody on videotape, that's usually the end of the story.
You're talking
Well,
about the scam.
yeah, I know, but
But one of the things in the New York County case, they had tapes, but the audibility was atrocious.
Yeah.
From what I understand, the audibility in this case, the audibility is excellent.
In this case, too, one fact that seems to get lost every day is that a judge who is not one of the strictest, most conservative judges in the world, Leo Glasser, has listened to these tapes and found that they prove beyond a doubt that John Gotti is a danger to the community because he kills people and he obstructs justice. And he has kept him in jail without bail for 11 months now. Now, Leo Glasser is not the most conservative judge. He's, relatively liberal. He makes the government work for its convictions, and he doesn't let them get away with a lot of stuff that other judges do. He's not a government judge.
let me just go around the circle here. What's the biggest misconception about organized crime in America?
biggest misconception? Probably that it's as big as it is, I would guess.
Well, I think the biggest misconception right now we've got, because we have 2 years in a row, the New York Times has written stories saying that the mob is dead.
Yeah.
The mob is
The
dead. I
misconception
think
is that it's alive and well and kicking.
there's no question
and
that it's
whenever
alive and
somebody's
well.
knocked off, someone else steps up to
steps
replace
up.
them.
The structure of organized crime, the Italian-American organized
Yeah.
crime, the mafia, is so ingrained that, and so well, and the tradition goes back so long that it's going to take another
And will
10,
continue
20,
even if
30
Gotti
years.
goes to jail.
No question about it.
What's the
I
biggest
think probably
misconception?
the misconception is the Hollywood glorification or glamorization of the mafia. I think that that it isn't like that at all. I think that these people are thugs. They're very brutal. They're greedy, and they're not. They could be charming on certain levels, but when it comes to business, these people are very brutal, despicable people.
John?
I think the biggest misconception that is borne out now is this omerta, the oath of silence. I think that is a part of mob history because it is clearly gone.
And that seems to be a looming threat, does it not? Especially if Gravano...
Absolutely. And it's a domino effect. I mean, in the commission case, when the bosses all got sentenced to 100 years, and then they had trials before that where they were sentenced to 100 years, you take a guy in his 30s and 40s in a significant organized crime position who says, 100 years? Have you got a minute? That's a long time.
Can we talk?
If I did 15, I could be out when I'm 50-something years old. I have a life to live after that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's weighing heavily, especially when they see the other lesser lights rolling over and having success.
Michael Francis making movies about himself.
He got arrested today.
Yeah. For what?
Yeah. Some financial indiscretion.
All right, I'm out of time here. Now, with respect to Gravano, he will go into, he is now and will go into witness protection, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
What would be the threat to his family, if any?
His family has elected to stay behind so far, which is very unusual.
And if, in fact, have said what a stupid thing he's done, what I read in the paper at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right, Jerry?
Well, that's what I read today also. I don't know if they've gone quite that far as to say what a stupid thing he's done, but as of now, they're not in the they're not in the witness protection program, and you never know if Sammy Bull does testify for the government. They may testify for the defense. Who knows?
I got to ask this. If you were representing Sammy the Bull and he came to you and said, this is what I'm going to do, what would you say to him?
I would have said, that's your choice, fine.
That's all? You wouldn't have said...
You're about to get a crash course on acting. They're going to take you into studio equity and drill you for 90 days and get you ready.
Thank you all. Pleasure to have you. We'll be back and we'll talk about... First, the trial of reputed mob boss John Gotti is coming to a head in a Manhattan federal court. The prosecution's star witness, Gotti underboss Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, took the stand today. His testimony is expected to include Gotti's involvement in the rub-out of his predecessor, Gambino family boss Paul Castellano. Joining us now for an update on the testimony and their predictions are Ed McDonald. He is a former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney Gerald Lefcourt, and John Miller of WNBC Television News in New York. John Miller is coming. He should be here in just a few minutes. Joining us also is David Lewis, a well-known defense attorney who has been on this broadcast before, and we're pleased to have all of you, and when John comes, we'll have him join us. He was there at the trial and give us some sense of what happened during that trial and the mood and the atmosphere. Let me just start with you, Gerald Lefcourt. Tell me what Gravano and the significance of Gravano's testimony. It is on the front page of Tuesday's New York Times. Close confidant of Gotti testifies of mafia family's violent reign, describes in detail a plot to murder Castellano. Here is Sammy the Bull takes the stand, digging Gotti's grave. Godfather's ex-underboss tells how they planned rub out of Castellano.
Well, from the government's point of view, he's taken the stand and said, I was number 2 in this Gambino organized crime family, and he was the boss, John Gotti that is, and I was at planning meetings when the killing of Paul Castellano was discussed. I even met with shooters who actually did the shooting. But the problem...
Go ahead.
But the problem that is easily foreseen is that prior to Sammy the Bull becoming a government witness, the government's whole case and the other star witness, who is no longer now even a witness perhaps, was a person who was an innocent bystander on the street who was going to testify that John Gotti was on a street corner saying what happened to those guys. And he identified Gotti as being on the street corner. Now Sammy the Bull gets on the stand and says, I was on the inside of the family. Right. And he wasn't on any street corner. Rather, we were in a car driving around nearby. Now, it's a direct contradiction of what the whole government's case was before. I'm sure that this is something that's going to be exploited by the defense, because now this guy comes in who has a motive, by the way, from the defense point of view, at least that's what they've been arguing, to kill all these people who were charged with being the victims or the intended victims of murder, namely Sammy the Bull, who is probably going to be, portrayed as a lunatic.
Is that you have represented people accused of being members of organized crime, correct?
I have.
And so, David Lewis, have you represented people accused of being members of organized crime? You have, and you probably will in the future. Let me just raise this question. If you are the defense attorney and you're representing someone like John Gotti in this case, and you've got someone with the credentials of Mr. Gravano who is going to testify against your client, And the prosecution is stepping forward to say, yes, he has admitted 19 murders, and yes, this is a guy who is no better than John Gotti, but we want you to believe him because we've got tapes and we've got his testimony. What do you have to do to discredit Gravano?
Well, there are two problems. First, you've got to make sure that Gravano is far worse than any defendant in the courtroom by virtue of the acts he admits and acts that he has concealed from the government.
You as a defense attorney have to do that.
Absolutely. That's the first goal. The second goal is that while Gravano is going to say many things that the tapes mirror, there's an awful lot that the government wants from Gravano that they can't prove with the tapes. And so it's a little like the cross-examination is going to set up the argument that a guy comes in and says, I killed a grizzly bear with a pencil. Here, Charlie, here's the pencil. Well, that's not enough proof. And the two issues are what's real, what's made up, and whether or not what Gravano is so taints the courtroom that the jury can't convict anyone because Gravano is just so bad.
And you're a former prosecutor, now defense attorney, and your job is to use. John Miller, come on in. John Miller from WNBC. Good to have you here. We are underway with a conversation about what Gravano did. Let me switch first to John. Tell me about this day in court, John. I mean, how the mood and what Gravano said as we give you a chance to put your mic on.
I think without burying the lead, what Gravano said was he was in the car with John Gotti, standing by for Big Paul Castellano to be murdered. Prior to that, of course, the whole lead up to it was the history of his becoming a gangster, becoming a made member of the family, and then first being approached by Gotti's camp to gain his political support within the family to murder their own boss.
Now set up the mood for me. That's the testimony. What did John Gotti stare at him? Did Gravano avoid looking at Gotti? What was the...
This was truly high noon. I mean, this has been a trial that's already a month in progress, playing all kinds of tapes of Gotti and Gravano talking in secret in this location where the FBI had their bugs. So to actually see Sam Gravano sit up on the witness stand and stare straight past John Gotti as Gotti was drilling him with those eyes, trying to catch his eye, trying to stare him down, an entire front row of assorted made members of the Gambino crime family, family members, supporters, hang-around guys, all staring at Gravano, trying to turn up the heat. When they called for Gravano, the door's supposed to open, he's supposed to come in, there was a full 4 minutes that went by from wherever they had him hidden down whatever hallway in whatever bunker before he was produced. You could have heard a pin drop during that entire time. It was certainly the climax of the trial so far.
Yeah, and the most important thing that Gravano said was that he was in the car with Gotti, and that
Gotti at the murder scene.
And does he put in John Gotti's mouth, "Kill Paul Castellano"?
He puts in John Gotti's mouth and in the mouths of John Gotti's cronies through a series of meetings the intricate planning and politicking that went up to the murder at Gotti's behest.
If you are the prosecutor, put yourself in that position again. What do you have to do to, in a sense, take this man and make his testimony believable despite what the defense is going to do in order to destroy his credibility and say to that jury, you can't believe this man because of who he is?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that the defense has a serious problem here in cross-examining Gravano. Cross-examination of Gravano was going to be based on two things. One is his motive to lie, to make a better deal for himself. But secondly, they want to bring out all of his bad acts, his whole career of crime, his 19 murders, the fact that he's just totally reprehensible and just a disgusting human being. But the problem is that the jury has already listened to 4 weeks of tape-recorded conversations. And in most of those conversations, John Gotti is speaking to his constant companion, Sammy Gravano. So the jury is going to say, if Sammy Gravano was so bad, what is John Gotti doing hanging around with him? They have to say to themselves, well, you know, what he says makes some sense. There's a ring of truth here because these people are constantly together. The things that they're talking about, I mean, after a while, it begins to just pile up. You know, when they're talking about whacking somebody, I mean, they can argue from now until the cows come home that, you know, when they were saying whack, they meant something else. But after 4 weeks of constant conversation after conversation with
But
all
Ed,
the
how are
jargon,
they going to explain the fact that their whole case was based on a so-called innocent bystander?
Okay,
how did they get this guy to say that?
All right, now that's the problem.
Before they had Gravano. I mean, don't you think about this?
Explain what you mean by innocent bystander.
Somebody got some person who was not involved in the family, just somebody on the street, to place John Gotti on the street. How does the government get somebody
On
to say
Second
that?
Avenue.
But wait,
Yeah,
right,
right, go ahead.
Wait,
Hold on.
okay.
So this guy puts him on 2nd Avenue, and Gravano has him on 3rd Avenue.
In a car, though.
In a car, and he had him on the street.
That could be a
One of
critical
them is
problem
lying.
for the government.
One of them's got to be right.
I even got that, David.
But the point is that it opens up Gravano to the idea that even a story about an event that he says he was part of is completely fabricated. So how can you
Ed,
believe it?
tell him how.
No, I'm not going to tell him how, because I'm going to say there's a problem that the government has here. And it looks as if the government has been, and I haven't been present in the courtroom, and I've been following what I'm reading in the newspapers, and obviously the newspapers and the television are focused on the Castellano murder. But it appears that the government has fallen into this almost of a trap where they're making the Castellano murder the centerpiece of their case. It's sort of the be-all and the end-all. And if they're doing that and they're disregarding the other predicate crimes, you have to remember there are 5 or 6 other murders involved in this case, and the proof on those could be very, very substantial.
To Sammy Gravano rather than John Gotti.
Yeah, but John Gotti is admitting doing them right on the tape. He's admitting that he's saying Sammy came and asked me to do it, and other ones that Sammy Gravano was not involved in asking that he be executed. You know, the DiBernardo murder, and there's 2 other ones in which he was involved. But they can't. Well, I think that the government should really be focusing the jury's attention on the other cases, on the other murders, on the other crimes that are predicate crimes. They only have to have 2 predicate crimes in order to convict Gotti on the RICO count. They don't have to prove Paul Castellano
predicate crime?
The RICO statute requires that you prove that the defendant participated in a pattern of racketeering activity, and that pattern has to include 2 or more predicate felonies.
That statute is a statute which sort of ends the notion of fair trial in this country. For instance, could William Kennedy Smith have been acquitted if they were allowed to bring in all those other allegations of similar conduct? Right. Wouldn't the jury have ended up saying to themselves, oh, he must be guilty of one of them, so let's convict him? And that's what the RICO statute is. It sort of ends the notion that a jury can sit and focus on, did he do that? Beyond a reasonable doubt, because they throw so many things into the trial that they come away with saying, I must have done something.
What's the most interesting question to you in all of this?
In all of which?
The Gravano turning against Gotti and his testimony. I mean, obviously one big question is whether the jury will convict him, but beyond that, the interplay of these personalities, what is just the most interesting?
I think that it's so interesting that John Gotti has always portrayed himself, and we have essentially bought him as the canny gangster, you know, the ultimate gangster, the real gangster with the street sense, where the other guys have tried to simulate themselves as businessmen. It shows that his judgment in picking a backup, a guy that he considered was an excellent street boss, is extremely poor.
That's interesting to me, too, because there is, in one story I read, where somebody suggested that Sammy the Bull Gravano has been accused, or maybe has acknowledged, that he killed his best friend and rubbed out, whacked his best friend. And when Gotti saw that and heard about that, assuming that all these things are true, that Gotti should have known that if he do that, what might he do to me at some point if somebody gets to him?
The interesting thing about this to me is that Gravano, according to this plea agreement, will probably be on the street in a few years. I mean, and here's a guy who's admitted to all of these murders.
Okay, that's my second question. You know, what was the deal? Why did Gravano make the deal? Ed?
Well, he made the deal because he didn't want to die in jail. He was looking at a prison sentence of 100 years. He knew that if he were convicted in this case, which he probably would be,
but there are other people.
die in jail.
Haven't there been other people in that position who would have gone to prison for a long time if they didn't turn against someone else in the family?
Sammy Gravano was ultimately an Erzarts gangster. I mean, he had never done any prison time. He claimed to be this tough guy. And the first time he spent a few weeks in jail. Right. Before he was in jail a year, not even convicted, but awaiting trial. Not even with the dark horizon of spending the rest of his life. With the full idea that if he beat this case, he might even walk out. He approached the feds and said, "What do you want to know?"
He initiated the contact?
I believe he had been offered a way to approach the feds several times, and at some point he took the bait.
So his lawyer says it's not a question of how the feds got to him and twisted and turned and forced him by saying you're going to sit in a cell and rot and all that stuff.
No, the lawyer who was representing him has said publicly that he didn't even know that his client was having conversations with the government, that he reached out.
The FBI was sending feelers to him on a regular basis. Sure.
Well, I don't know how
they picked him as the weak link, and they were right.
And what is it they saw in him that made them think think he was the weak link?
A guy who had never done time,
Yeah.
a guy who acted real tough, who you just didn't read as really being that tough. He worked too hard at it.
Yeah. Is this... Go ahead, David.
The real problem is that Gravano gets an agreement like this, and either somebody was on 2nd Avenue or somebody
This
was
is
3rd
the,
Avenue.
so this is the agreement. Go ahead. That we can come. John brought this, I guess. Did you?
Yeah, and basically the truth's for sale, and the end result is that whether they get Gotti or not in this case, a guy like Gravano, who clearly has all these murders, is someone who, for everybody else, is coming to a theater near you. I mean, this guy's getting out, and he's getting out because he joined Team America at the right time.
So what's wrong with that? I mean,
Because,
what's
you know,
wrong with
because
that?
there's a problem with reliability. When you make somebody an offer they can't refuse, whether you are the government or a mobster,
Yeah.
it's still an offer you can't refuse. What they're saying to him is, you get out of jail if you help us convict Gotti.
Yeah.
So he helps them
Are
convict
you
Gotti.
two guys saying that you don't believe Gravano because, in terms of the testimony he's going to make?
I have a substantial question about Gravano not knowing anything, except that he has committed, by his own admission, numerous murders, committed all these deaths.
And are you saying that
why should we
because-
believe him now?
I think if he's a killer, then selling the truth
Jump in here,
is a
Ed.
minor deal. And either my own conclusion is that if you don't believe, if you're willing to believe Gravano and you're willing to believe the neutral eyewitness, then Gotti's able to be on 2 avenues at once.
Well, look, I
Come
think
on,
you have
guys.
to remember that this was a case that it was a case that was brought with a lot of fanfare by the FBI before Sammy Gravano ever turned, and
On a different theory, apparently.
well, no. You're focusing only on the Castellano
That's
murder,
true.
okay? And we're talking about a case with several other predicates, and you're talking about one witness, and you're talking about a lot of other proof that's involved in the case, circumstantial evidence, and tape-recorded conversations. It was a case that the government and the FBI felt very confident of. I mean, usually you don't hear the FBI
this
shoot
is
their
the-
mouths off too often about guaranteeing victories. Once in a while they fail, but in big mafia cases, 9 times out of 10 they win the cases.
It begs the question, if the tapes were so good, and they are, if the evidence was so strong, and it seems to be, why did they want to infect, if you will, the credibility of all of that superb evidence by bringing in as their partner the most despicable character in the
I don't know.
case?
I don't know the
There's
answer
an
to that,
answer.
and maybe
The answer is greed. The answer is prosecutors are greedy to have as much, and if it doesn't fit sometimes, then we'll sort of move the innocent neutral guy out in that one count, maybe. And we want as much as we can get so we can pile it all on. And in a RICO case, if you put enough in the landfill, everybody says, see, garbage.
I mean,
and
look,
that's
that
the end of the
happens. That
discussion.
happens in some cases
But
when you
they've
pile
failed
on
at
with
that
informants.
before.
Well, it's
They
9 out
have
of
to
10.
know
John,
that by
answer
now.
your own question. Why do you think they brought Gravano in?
I think that they are like all other people. They put on a confident air, but they're basically insecure.
And they're worried that the tapes may not be enough, and if they've got
Also,
something else
there
that will
was
buttress
just
it.
a terrible hammer over their head. And if you asked them this, they would say it wasn't so.
Right.
But I don't mind saying it for them. They could not afford to lose this case. They can't afford to lose it now. If John Gotti went up to the plate for the 4th time and hit it out of the ballpark, the feds would have to take their bats and their gloves and go home with their tails between their legs. They can't lose to a guy they've described as a cheap punk gangster 4 times in a row and still hold their heads up when the guy's becoming a folk
But that
hero.
raises David's question, have they endangered their case because of his credibility?
I'm not a lawyer, which is the big advantage I have at this table. I think like one of the poor schlumps sitting on the jury. And I now wonder, with these tapes, with the FBI's clean seal on them, and with these witnesses, poor schlump civilians like me, who have no reason or motive to lie,
Yeah.
how I'm going to be affected by this despicable character, and why they have brought him here to taint the evidence.
Yeah.
Now, it may be that they're just thinking, the tapes are great, but there are gaps in them. Sammy can clear up the gaps.
And
Where
Sammy's
there's,
on the tapes.
when there's room for interpretation, we can say, well, never mind our interpretation with our expert agent. What were you guys talking about? And he can bring that home.
I've got to get to this last point. How was he as a witness? Credible, just forget the history and all that, how he handled himself on the stand.
He didn't come across as a terribly likable guy, although we gather he's not. But he spoke very softly.
Oh, come on.
But this is the
No, no,
subject
let him
of
finish. Let him
rehearsal.
finish.
This is,
He
he hasn't
spoke-
been on cross yet.
He spoke very softly, and he didn't go out on any limbs with explanations. He was being very cautious to give the briefest answer to the prosecutor. So he seemed to be very nervous.
But it's really, it's so early in the game. What happens here is that this witness has been rehearsed probably 20 to 50 times before getting on the stand. And the director's going in like a script, and then all of a sudden cross comes. And anything could happen on cross-examination.
David, last word.
I think we're going to see much more of what Gravano really is when Albert Krieger gets up to cross-examine.
Is Krieger pretty good?
Krieger
Excellent.
is excellent. He may be the greatest cross-examiner ever.
Ever?
Ever.
Didn't know that. Wow. All right. Stay tuned. Thank you all. Pleasure to have you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. First, in a federal courtroom, the trial of reputed mob boss John Gotti continues. Testifying for the prosecution, former Gotti underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano has detailed all 19 murders he himself took part in. Joining me now to tell us if this is the end for Gotti and what it may mean for organized crime are New York Newsday columnist Jimmy Breslin and John Miller from WNBC News. Welcome. You were in the courtroom today. Give me a sense of what Gravano said today.
I think what they were trying to do was to elicit from Gravano the laundry list of all the things the mob can do. So the questioning bounced from, did you kill this guy and this guy and this guy, to did you fix this guy's case? How did you get to the member of the jury, you know, to which the jurors leaned forward to hear? Well, it was the fish store across the street. The guy's daughter worked there, and I suggested a gift of $10,000 would be appropriate, Gravano said. Then they moved on. How do you shake down the construction industry? What kind of money is it worth? How much does Gotti get? How much do you get? They moved on through how do you decide as a mobster which guys are allowed to plead guilty and which guys have to fight it out? Who can get contempt in a grand jury, and how does the boss decide? They really wanted to give the jury an overview of how involved it all is. Now that they've gotten through Gravano's eyewitness account of a couple of major mob hits, they wanted to show them around the store a little.
How is he doing as a witness? I mean, is there a kind of consensus among smart, courthouse types?
He's doing very well as a witness, but he's in the easy part now. You know, they are pitching him the grounders, and he's, throwing them back. I think on cross-examination, which will begin tomorrow, that'll be his real challenge. But his presence is very low-key, and to his credit, credibility-wise, when he doesn't know something or can't remember, he doesn't fudge it. He says, I don't know.
Yeah. What do you think of this, Jimmy?
I think out of 100, 88 people, 88% are absolutely certain that Gotti's gone. I mean, he might as well stay in jail.
Out of 100?
There's only 12 more votes to count,
yes.
And then he'll be gone for sure. I mean, it's unanimous. He looks like he's gone, and it's up to the jury. Gravano, as he talks and tells the story, there's one very bad thing about his testimony, in that it sounds like the truth, which is the worst thing of all. That's worse than the murder, is the fact the guy's telling the truth.
That they, in fact, did it.
Yeah, he sounds like he's telling the truth, and I think they might have a tough time with him if he is. I mean, where he was saying, where he says, I don't know, that's bad.
What does it remind you of? I mean, give me a kind of Breslin look at this guy.
I never saw anybody. Oh, this guy?
Yeah.
Well, he's got to be a bed bug, huh?
Yeah.
And that he was paying a guy to spar with him and to look good as a fighter. He's a 40-year-old guy trying to learn how to use his hands in the gym. And with the guy Eddie V that boxed the man a couple of times.
This is how you led the column.
And but he paid him. Yeah. Like he walked in with two guys walked into the gym. There's a great big guy and there's a little Gravano. Yeah. So Vico, don't think that the big guy is the big shot. It's the little guy is the big one. He's the one that pays. And he never hit him back. He just boxed him and never hit him. Now, one thing about prize fighting, there are two parts to it. One is that you hit the guy, and the other is that sometimes he hits back, and it now is up to you. Can you take that punch? Well, Sammy never had the thrill of fear getting into that sphere. They never hit him.
Yeah.
In fact, he boxed with a heavyweight Sipes, who didn't hit him. I mean, he just wanted. So there's something the matter with him from the go if you're doing that.
Yeah, and maybe that's a link to the fact that we have talked about on this broadcast before, that he decided to turn government witness because he'd never really been to prison, had he not? And so therefore, the same thing. He hadn't been hit, and he's never been inside.
He never was inside at all.
Yeah.
Huh? Well, he never was in a fight.
Let me take a look at this. Is from John Miller on WNBC television in New York, a piece that he put together about Sammy Gravano and who he is and how he got to where he is. Take a look.
Quite easy, Frank.
There was no one closer to mob boss John Gotti than this man, Sam Gravano. Known to fellow mobsters as Sammy the Bull, Gravano was the alleged underboss to Gotti of the Gambino family, the largest crime family in the United States. News 4 has learned exclusively that Gravano has turned canary. He will be the star witness for federal prosecutors at the Gotti trial, the trial where he was supposed to be the second defendant. The idea that Gotti's own underboss would testify against him, under oath, in open court, sent shockwaves through mob circles. Lawyers didn't believe it, mobsters didn't believe it, but it's true. Ironically, Gravano was promoted from the position of consigliere, or advisor to the boss, to Gotti's underboss, so he could run the family after Gotti was in jail. Hidden FBI microphones actually recorded Gotti asking Gravano which job title he would want.
So I'm asking you, how do you feel? You want to stay as good here? Or you want me to make you official underboss, acting boss? How do you feel? What makes you feel better?
What made Gravano feel better after Gotti was arrested ended up not mattering too much. Gravano was arrested with Gotti. And like Gotti, he's been in jail without bail ever since. Federal sources confirmed that the FBI delivered a letter from Sammy Bull to his defense lawyer, Ben Braffman, on Friday. The letter said Braffman was fired and that Gravano would no longer need his services for the trial.
I had absolutely no hand in it whatsoever. I had no advanced knowledge that he had had any contact with the government of any kind. The letter came as a complete surprise and a complete shock. And quite frankly, I don't know what his true status is at this time. I haven't been able to contact him.
Back to the point you made, do you think most people you know think that Gotti, that this is really the case against Gotti, and that with this kind of testimony, notwithstanding the credibility of Gravano, the conventional wisdom is that this is it?
Yeah, but it's up to the jury, which is why I'm quoting it so authoritatively.
88.
Everybody, he's gone. I mean, it's the jury.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can say anything until they come in.
And you know the experience we've all had predicting juries.
You never predict what they're going to do, and you keep your mouth shut if you've got any. If you want to look smart, if you want to look dumb, go and say what they're going to do.
I mean, typically we would stand in the hallway in a big case, and between the lawyers and the prosecutors and the courtroom experts,
it's all settled.
We would all say, well, clearly these are the issues they're wrestling with, and it just hangs on that. And ultimately, when you finally talk to the jurors,
it wasn't that at all.
It was they never discussed that.
Yeah.
You know.
I was thinking that I saw Lee Bailey in the courtroom yesterday. He came to Queens County.
He's representing some witness, isn't he, or something? Yeah. Okay.
He was there. He came to court in Queens County for two brothers on a murder, and he went around the courthouse for a long time before giving out books and autographing, so all the courtroom people would be formed, the marshals and the court officers and everything. He gets me in the hallway when the jury is coming in, and he said, we're getting a verdict, and I'm told I'm not going to like it. And the two defendants he had were very rank, were not going to behave well, two tough guys. And he had one hand under the table when the jury came in, so he knew enough to follow his hand underneath the table because they were going to go nuts, the two guys with him. The guy stood up, death warmed over the jury. They were, you know, they looked, all they needed was a rope, and he said, not guilty. Bailey just went like this. He went out, and he says, I'll never talk again as long as I live. He couldn't believe it. Yeah. So therefore, I don't see how you can just stand around. As John says, you can get very smart in the hallway.
Yeah.
Still the case. It's like a joke. It's like an FBI guy sat down when he retired and said, I don't know, if I could have made up a case out of my head, I mean, I would have wanted a bug in his secret meeting room that was clear. I would have wanted another bug in his clubhouse. And as a witness, I think I'll take the underboss.
Where does the defense see that they can make some inroads on this?
It's very tough to cross-examine those tapes. You know, they can scream all they want. They're taken out of context. But you'll get a lot further cross-examining a guy who admits to 19 murders than you will with a piece of tape recording. This is their big chance right now.
And what is Gravano like when he talks about the murders? I mean, is it matter-of-factly? Is it just, I whacked him, I whacked him, I whacked him, I whacked him?
Much the way you and I would say, I waxed the car, and then I went to the store.
Yeah. And does anybody raise the question of how could you do that, or what were you thinking about, or?
Not the prosecutor, but you can bet the defense will.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, we're talking about a guy, not that John Gotti came to him and said, kill this guy, kill this guy, kill this guy. We're talking about Sammy Gravano, who killed in various orders his best friend and brother-in-law, then his new best friend, Louis Melito.
Right.
And when Louis Melito's daughter came to him and said, my father's missing, he said, if anything ever happened, if my car broke down, if I needed money, anything, and I couldn't find him, to come to you. And he said, sweetheart, I'll look around for him. I'll get back to you.
And
he just finished murdering him. Louis DeBono, his other business partner, Frankie Batts, a member of his own crew.
And why did he kill all these people?
3 of them were business disagreements, and one of them he was concerned. The guy had started using drugs, and he thought he might be unreliable. That's his story. So some of it was business, some of it was personal, but it was him going to Gotti and saying, I need clearance to kill these guys.
Why are we so fascinated by this? And I mean, you're writing columns about it, I'm doing television programs, and John's out there covering it every day.
I don't know. It certainly doesn't have much to do with what's going on.
No, it doesn't, but we're all sort of captured by this.
Well, it's good. It's an imitation of the movies.
Yeah.
You can't make a movie out of this because it's so small and tawdry. These are street corner bums, pool hall, loan sharking, crap games, nothing of any...
but that's the most incredible thing, because you know and I know that these guys are bums off the street.
Nothing.
Then when you examine it and say, who controls the carpenters union in New York? Who controlled, until recently, may still, the concrete industry? Who controlled the window replacement business? $2 a window, billions of windows in the city. Who controls all of these major businesses, the trucking industry and the garment center?
That is different. Those fellas are different that had the trucks.
The classier end of the
They've
spectrum.
had money for over 50 years.
But the influence
Gambinos who plea bargained and said they'd get out of the business and all that.
That's your movie.
So,
that's the movie.
Why?
John Gotti's still their boss.
Yeah,
and he still gets a piece of the pie.
Because the bottom line in the business is they shoot. That's why that Sammy must have be the number 2 guy with Gotti, because Gotti's afraid he'd kill him. I guess Sammy apparently killed everybody in New York except himself.
Yeah, but see, the interesting thing about it, as has been brought out before, why would Gotti choose someone assuming...
Fear. The only reason anybody does anything. Fear, and also that he's obviously a bedbug, an imbecile, and he's not going to be a threat to me.
Yeah, but
so much,
here's
maybe,
it's still, we're talking about this kind of power that these people have. Power? Yet at the same time, when you see them and listen to them, they don't seem that they have the kind of wherewithal to be that smart.
I don't think they can run a candy store. This group, I think the
So
others he's talking about, well, the trucking with the Gambinos.
These are the guys in the fashion district.
That's another story.
That's another story.
And the cement was Tony Salerno, which is another story, too.
Right.
Tony.
But it's a critical theory, because here Tommy Gambino was on trial. It looked like he was probably going to win in that case because of the case dynamics. Here was John Gotti on trial, and it looked like he was probably going to lose. But Tommy Gambino never even took the chance. He forks over $12 million, gives up a portion of his trucking industry, takes 1 foot out of the garment center, because I think the simple math is, wait a minute, if it's 90-1 that John Gotti is going away for 100 years, why do I want to be doing time even in some, I should be there, to either become the new boss.
To take over in case Gotti goes away.
Right, yeah. or to get some kind of good, profitable footing here.
Retire into the scenery.
I read the stories of jury tampering. I mean, how do they close that opportunity down here?
Oh, I don't know how do you ever close it? There's 12 human beings,
They've lost
and they know a
2
lot
jurors
of people.
in 2 days.
2 jurors in 2 days.
1 today, 1 yesterday.
Sure.
Why?
Shrouded in secrecy, this judge, who's not a First Amendment buff, has sealed the record. But what we've learned from our sources is that one juror's girlfriend kept approaching authorities with her perceived fears that either she was being followed or threatened or something, and they investigated it, decided that there was no substance, but they said, she may upset this juror, and that may sway him. Let's pull him out. And they did. Now, just as suddenly, another juror disappears today. That person's been pulled out with no explanation. So you see it's always bubbling under the surface.
You always know something. The world is not large. If you put 12 people in a jury box, how many? 16?
18 now,
18
right?
now,
Down
there's
to
a
16.
chance.
Down to 16 because of these
down
two.
to 16 now. You have to figure those 16 out of the 16 somewhere, someplace, to somebody who knows somebody who knows
somebody who knew somebody's grandfather, who knew somebody's mother.
Absolutely.
And I mean, this jury was picked from Brooklyn, from Queens, from Long Island and Staten Island, the mob's backyard, where the mob lives, in fact. If this was a Manhattan trial and they were talking about people from the East Side or Westchester, it might be different. But it's very tough to get an Eastern District jury that is unreachable unless you really lock them down, which they've pretty well done.
The point you made about Mr. Gambino, who I guess plea bargained and gave up some money and some whatever commitments in order to be there in the wings in case something happens to Gotti. Does it make no difference if John Gotti goes down in terms of the future of organized crime? Joe Hines was here, and he said all these stories about organized crime getting weaker are simply not true, that they're as strong, you were here when he said it, they're as strong as they've ever been.
He hung his hat on the gambling statistics.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, on that.
You want? I mean, what? So
they can't go into a black neighborhood. They're fat, middle-aged guys. They get wiped out inside of 30 seconds. You can't go into a black neighborhood. They can't put up with a 112-pound South American who'll kill everybody, wives, women, children, doesn't care. They can't do that. Where are they going to go? They've got the government on them every place else. No, I think it's a dying breed. And the gambling as well. What are they telling? What do you mean with the gambling? Well,
Heinz cracked down on the gambling. Remember right before the Super Bowl?
That's
what he told me.
What he said that day was that when he was in rackets 15 years ago, the gambling take was X, and now it was 4 times.
I don't know what the gambling take ever was. This is 1992. I think it's very, very difficult. You can't tell people from John Gotti's crew to go onto New York Boulevard in South Jamaica because they will not come back in good shape. So I don't know where they're going to go. I don't think they're anywhere near what they were, and I think the losers will be the movie business. That's all.
You mean there'll be no more Bugsies to do?
No, Bugsies
is a what?
I mean, they make movies out of bed bugs, but it goes. You can't criticize. Let It Go was great, but. Gotti movie, I don't know. How are you going to make a movie out of somebody everybody knows? You'd have to wait 20 years. He'll be the new Capone. They'll make movies out of him 30 years.
You mean we'll make a legend out of him when he wasn't a legend in his own time?
That's right. Capone died in Alcatraz. This guy, who knows? And they'll make a big thing out of this guy years to come.
How long is this trial going to go on?
I would say probably another 3 weeks. Yeah. I think it's happening much faster than they thought.
Boy, is it ever. Yes, very fast. Yeah. Nothing like a witness that can talk a lot in one day to move things along. Wow.
Really? And is there general consensus that the defense attorney without Cutler, that the defense is still strong because this guy from Miami is as good, or from Florida is as good as they say he is?
There's general consensus that John Gotti would rather have Bruce Cutler there. He said it himself. And Al Krieger is tiptoeing around this judge who is ready to hammer any defense lawyer who crosses his line in the sand. So we haven't really seen much from Al yet.
Okay. Thank you both.
Thank
Jimmy,
you.
Good to see you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you, John.